The champagne glasses were raised, a chorus of crystal ringing through the penthouse. All eyes were on Julian Croft, the billionaire titan of tech, as he beamed at his adoring guests. Standing by his side was his pregnant wife, Era Vance, the picture of grace and devotion. They were the city's golden couple. But as Julian prepared to give his birthday toast, Era's hand tightened on a hidden phone. She wasn't about to toast her husband. She was about to bury him. What she held was a script of his betrayal, a transcript of his affair, and she was about to read it aloud to the most powerful people in New York City. The air in the penthouse, 75 stories above Central Park, was always a precise 72 degrees. It was an atmosphere curated for comfort, for perfection, just like everything else in Era Vance's life. The sprawling apartment, a monument of glass and Italian marble, felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit of a happy marriage. Every coffee table book was artfully angled. Every white orchid was misted twice daily, and every photograph of her and Julian Croft was framed in gleaming silver, capturing moments of manufactured bliss. For the first 2 years, it had been bliss. Julian, the self-made billionaire behind the tech giant Nexus Dynamics, had swept her off her feet. He was a whirlwind of intoxicating charm, razor-sharp intelligence, and an ambition that burned so brightly it warmed everyone near him. Era, a successful architect who had already made her own name with a series of award-winning sustainable building designs, had been his equal, not his accessory. Theirs was a partnership, they'd told the magazines, a meeting of minds. But over the last year, and especially in the 4 months since she'd told him she was pregnant, a subtle chill had begun to permeate their climate-controlled world. It was a draft of indifference she felt when he'd worked through the night, not with the frenetic energy of creation she once admired, but with a grim, secretive intensity. It was in the way his phone, once casually left on the nightstand, was now perpetually in his pocket or placed face down, vibrating silently against his bespoke suits. He'd called the baby, their baby, the ultimate merger. He'd smiled when he said it, but the words had landed wrong, like a piece of corporate jargon misapplied to the most intimate part of their lives. He'd become a man of grand, empty gestures. He threw her a lavish baby shower where he barely spoke to her, instead networking with the husbands of her friends. He bought her a new Tesla, not because she needed one, but because it was a public display of his generosity, another press release for their perfect life. The suspicion began as a whisper in the back of her mind, a quiet hum of wrongness she tried to silence. She was pregnant, hormonal, she told herself. Julian was under immense pressure. Nexus was about to launch Odyssey, a revolutionary AI platform that would either double his fortune or ruin his company. That had to be it. Tonight was his 40th birthday, the social event of the season. 200 of New York's elite were due to arrive in 3 hours. Caterers from Jean Georges swarmed the kitchen. A string quartet was tuning up on the main terrace, and a 10-foot ice sculpture of the Nexus logo dripped slowly in the center of the grand ballroom. Era, dressed in a flowing emerald gown that accentuated her 5-month baby bump, directed the staff with a practiced, serene smile. But inside, the hum of wrongness had become a roar. The catalyst had been a brief moment of carelessness from a man who was never careless. Julian had been on a frantic call in his study, pacing and barking orders. He'd rushed out for a last-minute meeting with his board, grabbing his jacket and shouting a perfunctory, "Love you, darling," over his shoulder. But he'd left his personal phone on the mahogany desk, not his work phone, the one that was always ringing, but his private one, the sleek black slate he guarded so jealously. Era stared at it for a full minute, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was it. The line she had promised herself she would never cross. The act of a paranoid, untrusting wife she never wanted to be. Her hand trembled as she walked into the study. The room smelled of his expensive cologne and leather-bound books, a scent that once comforted her and now felt suffocating. She picked up the phone. It was unlocked. A fatal oversight. Her thumb hovered over the screen, over the green icon with the white speech bubble. She could feel her life splitting into 2 distinct timelines, the one where she put the phone down, smoothed over her dress, and continued playing the part of the perfect, trusting wife, and the one where she looked. Her baby gave a soft kick, a gentle flutter against her palm, which was now pressed to her stomach. It was a reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just about her pride anymore. It was about the family she was trying to build, the world she was bringing a child into. She owed it to her baby to know the truth, no matter how ugly. She tapped the icon. The message thread at the top was pinned. The name was simply S. The last message had come in just 20 minutes ago. S. Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be the one in the red dress you love. Julian, you'll be the only one I see. This whole thing is a circus. Just have to play the part for a few more hours. Era's breath hitched. Her vision blurred. Circus. Play the part. She scrolled up, her thumb moving with a life of its own, a desperate, frantic search for something, anything that would prove this was a misunderstanding. But it only got worse. The messages stretched back for months, a secret history of her marriage written in terse, damning sentences. S. Is the asset becoming a problem? Julian, she's emotional. The pregnancy is making her needy, but it's manageable. It's the perfect cover. No one suspects a thing when a man is about to become a father. The asset. She was the asset. Her pregnancy was the cover. Era had to sit down in Julian's leather chair, the cold material shocking against her skin. The words swam before her eyes, each one a separate, deliberate stab wound. She kept scrolling, past hotel room numbers, rendezvous times, and explicit photos that made her physically ill. Sienna Hayes, she realized with a jolt of ice water in her veins, a fiercely ambitious junior VP in his marketing department. Era had met her a few times at company functions, young, beautiful, with a predatory hunger in her eyes that Era had mistaken for ambition. Then she found the messages that shattered what was left of her heart. They were from 3 weeks ago, shortly after their 20-week scan, where they'd learned they were having a boy. Era had cried with joy. Julian had held her hand and smiled, telling her he was the happiest man alive. So, it's a boy. Does this change the timeline? Julian, no. If anything, it solidifies it. The board loves the family man narrative. It stabilizes the stock ahead of the Odyssey launch. He's leverage, not a legacy. And what about her? The prenup is ironclad, right? Julian, written by sharks. There's a fidelity clause, but she'd have to prove it. And I don't leave a trail. Once Odyssey is stable and the stock is settled, I'll handle the dissolution of the merger. Quietly. She won't know what hit her. Leverage, not a legacy. Dissolution of the merger. The clinical, brutal language of a hostile takeover. That's all she was. That's all their son was. A strategic play in his vast corporate game. The love, the partnership, the family, was all a lie. A carefully constructed illusion to protect his stock price. For a moment, the world went silent. The sounds of the party preparations faded away. The only thing she could hear was the frantic, panicked beating of her own heart. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it impossible to breathe. She wanted to scream, to shatter the crystal vases, to tear the paintings from the walls. But then another feeling began to rise through the grief, cold and sharp and hard as a diamond. It was rage, a pure, crystalline rage she had never felt before. He had underestimated her. He had called her an asset, something to be managed and then quietly discarded. He thought he'd left no trail. She was holding the trail in her hands. He had built his empire on an image of untouchable perfection. He was Julian Croft, the golden boy, the devoted husband, the expectant father. His reputation was his most valuable currency, more precious than any stock. And tonight, the most powerful people in his world, his investors, his board members, his rivals, the media, would be gathered under his roof. They were coming to toast his success. Era stood up, her movements no longer trembling, but deliberate and steady. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window, the glittering lights of Manhattan sprawling behind her like a fallen constellation. She saw the emerald dress, the soft swell of her belly, the tears staining her cheeks. Then she wiped the tears away, her expression hardening. He wanted a circus. She would give him a spectacle, the likes of which New York had never seen. He had written a script for their life together, a cold corporate drama. But she was about to rewrite the final act. She took a screenshot of the most damning messages, then another, and another. She methodically sent them to a secure cloud-based folder she created years ago for her architectural work, a digital vault he knew nothing about. She then airdropped a few select images to her own phone, the one he thought was just for calling her mother and tracking her pregnancy apps. She placed his phone back on the desk, exactly where he had left it. She walked out of the study, closing the door softly behind her. The head caterer approached her, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mrs. Croft, is everything all right? You seem pale." Era looked at him, and for the first time in hours, a genuine smile touched her lips. It was a chilling, predatory smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything is perfect, Robert," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Absolutely perfect. Let's get ready for the party, shall we? I have a feeling it's going to be a night to remember." The first guests arrived precisely at 8 p.m., a river of couture and old money flowing from the private elevator into the grand ballroom. The air shimmered with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of powerful conversations. Era stood at the entrance, a radiant vision in green, a fixed smile on her face that felt like a porcelain mask. Julian was by her side, his arm possessively around her waist, his hand resting on the swell of her belly for the benefit of the society photographers chronicling the event. "Darling, you look breathtaking," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. His voice was a low, intimate caress, the same voice he used in their wedding video, the same voice that had whispered 1,000 lies into the night. She could feel the vibration of it, and it made her skin crawl. "Only for you, Julian," she replied, her voice sweet enough to rock teeth. She met his gaze, holding it for a beat too long, letting him see the adoration he expected to see. Inside, she was a block of Arctic ice. She greeted their guests by name, her memory flawless. There were the Delacroix brothers, banking scions whose family had practically financed the Gilded Age. There was Senator Thompson, a man whose political campaign's Nexus dynamics had generously supported. There was Beatrice Ashworth, the terrifyingly influential editor of Vogue, whose approval could make or break a social season. And there were the members of Julian's board, men with faces like calculating predators, their eyes constantly scanning the room for opportunities and threats. They were all here, the architects and arbiters of Julian's universe. Era moved through the crowd like a ghost, a whisper of silk and a flash of a perfect smile. She laughed at their jokes, inquired about their children, and accepted their fawning compliments on her maternal glow. Each interaction was a performance, each smile a carefully aimed weapon. She was gathering her audience, lulling them into the familiar narrative of the happy couple, the perfect life. She saw Sienna Hayes arrive. She was impossible to miss, a slash of crimson in a sea of tasteful blacks and navy blues. The dress was audacious, clinging to her athletic frame, a bold statement of intent. Her eyes immediately found Julian's across the crowded room, and for a fraction of a second, Era saw a flicker of private communication pass between them. A subtle nod, a slight lift of a champagne glass. It was so swift, so practiced that anyone else would have missed it. But Era, her senses now honed to a razor's edge, saw it all. Sienna began to work the room, but not like a guest. She moved like a hunter, engaging board members with a confident smile, laughing with a familiarity that spoke of late nights in the office and shared secrets. She was positioning herself not as a junior VP, but as a future queen. Era felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She retreated to a quiet corner of the terrace overlooking the glittering expanse of Central Park. The cool night air was a balm on her feverish skin. She drew her own phone from the small beaded clutch that matched her dress. She opened her notes app, where she had transcribed the messages. She read them again, letting the cold, hard words fortify her resolve. Leverage, not a legacy. Dissolution of the merger. She won't know what hit her. A waiter approached. "Can I get you something, Mrs. Croft? A sparkling water perhaps?" Era looked up, her eyes clear and focused. "No, thank you, Daniel. But could you do something for me? In about 10 minutes, when my husband begins his toast, could you ensure the volume on the microphone is turned up? All the way up. I want to make sure even the guests in the back can hear clearly." The waiter, a young man who had worked their parties before, looked momentarily confused, but nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Croft." She went back inside. The party was reaching its crescendo. The string quartet had been replaced by a jazz ensemble, and the gentle hum of conversation had risen to a joyful roar. Julian stood near the grand piano, basking in the glow of his own success. He caught Era's eye and beckoned her over. It was time. As she walked towards him, a path seemed to clear for her. Guests smiled, parting respectfully for the pregnant wife of the man of the hour. It felt like walking through the Red Sea. She reached his side and he took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. It felt like being shackled. "My beautiful Era," he said, his voice now amplified by the microphone a waiter had just handed him. The crowd quieted, their faces turning towards the couple, full of warmth and expectation. "My brilliant, beautiful wife, who has given me the greatest gift of all." He placed his other hand on her stomach again, a proprietary, performative gesture that made her want to flinch away. "Tonight, I am a man who has everything," Julian continued, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "A company that is changing the world. Friends who have stood by me. And a family on the way. I look out at all of you, the people who have been part of my journey, and my heart is full." He raised his champagne glass. "But before we toast to the future, I want to say a few words about the woman who is my anchor, my inspiration, my wife." This was her cue in their private script. This was where she was supposed to blush, to look at him with tears of joy in her eyes, to embody the role of the adoring, grateful wife. Julian turned to her, his smile broad and impossibly handsome. "Darling." Era took a step forward towards the microphone. She gently removed her hand from Julian's grasp. She looked out at the sea of expectant faces, at Beatrice Ashworth, at Senator Thompson, at the stony-faced board members. She saw Sienna Hayes standing near the bar, a triumphant little smirk on her face, her red dress like a warning siren. "Thank you, Julian," Era said, her voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the vast, silent room. It was not the soft, demure voice they expected. There was a new, unfamiliar timbre to it, a resonance of cold, hard steel. "Julian is right," she continued, turning to face the crowd directly. "He is a man who values family. He believes in communication. In fact, he's such a dedicated communicator that he often works late into the night, making sure every message is perfectly crafted. He leaves nothing to chance." A flicker of confusion crossed Julian's face. This was not in the script. He started to put a hand on her arm to guide her back, but she subtly shifted away, claiming the space as her own. "I used to think his greatest creations were his algorithms for Nexus Dynamics," Era said, her voice ringing with a terrifying clarity. "But recently, I discovered he's been working on a more personal project. A collaboration, you might say." She pulled her own phone from her clutch. The screen was already on, the font size increased. The room was so quiet you could hear the fizz of the champagne bubbles dying in 100 glasses. "He thought he'd left no trail," she said, her eyes finding Sienna's in the crowd. Sienna's smirk had vanished, replaced by a dawning horror. "But he made a mistake. He left his phone unlocked. So, I'd like to read you some of his most recent, brilliant communications. A birthday tribute, of sorts, to the real Julian Croft. Julian's face had turned from beaming host to a mask of white-hot panic. "Era, what are you doing?" he hissed, lunging for the microphone. But she was faster. She turned her body, shielding the microphone, and held up her phone. "This is a message to a woman he calls, S. I believe she's with us tonight. You'll know her by her red dress." A collective gasp. 100 heads swiveling to find the crimson stain in the room. He writes, "This whole thing is a circus. Just have to play the part for a few more hours." The silence was broken by a few nervous coughs. Julian was frozen, his hand outstretched, his face a grotesque tableau of shock and rage. Era's voice grew stronger, colder. "But he's not just a romantic. He's a strategist, especially about our baby. In a message about our son, he writes, the board loves the family man narrative. It stabilizes the stock ahead of the Odyssey launch. He's leverage, not a legacy." A glass shattered somewhere in the back of the room. The sound was like a gunshot. The faces of the board members had turned to stone. Senator Thompson was staring at Julian as if he'd just grown a second head. "And what about me?" Era's voice cracked for a moment, the only hint of the pain beneath the rage. She took a breath, composing herself. What about his loving, pregnant wife? Well, he and S had a plan for that, too. She locked eyes with Julian, whose face was now ashen. "Once Odyssey is stable, and the stock is settled," she read, her voice a death knell in the cavernous silence, "I'll handle the dissolution of the merger quietly. She won't know what hit her." She lowered the phone. She looked out at the wreckage she had created. The party was dead. The joy had curdled into shock and scandal. Beatrice Ashworth was already subtly tapping on her phone, no doubt dictating the story that would grace every gossip column by morning. The board members were looking at Julian, not with sympathy, but with cold, hard calculation. They weren't looking at a friend. They were looking at a liability, a plunging stock price. Finally, she turned her gaze back to her husband, the man she had loved, the man who had called her child leverage. "So, you're right, Julian," she said, her voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, which was somehow more terrifying. "You said I wouldn't know what hit me." She paused, then leaned into the microphone, delivering the final, devastating line. "But you will." She placed the microphone carefully on the piano. Without looking at anyone, her back straight, her head held high, she walked, not out of the room, but towards the main elevator, the one that led not to the other floors of the building, but directly to the street. She passed Sienna Hayes, who was frozen in place, her face a mask of utter ruin, the red dress now looking cheap and desperate. Era didn't look at her. She didn't look at Julian. She kept walking, each step an act of demolition, bringing the glittering, gilded cage of her marriage crashing down around her. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. She stepped inside, and as the doors slid shut, sealing her away from the carnage, she allowed herself a single, shuddering breath. It wasn't a breath of sorrow. It was a breath of freedom. Months later, Era stood in the sun-drenched living room of a Brooklyn brownstone, a home filled not with Italian marble, but with warm, reclaimed wood and the scent of baking bread. She gently rocked her infant son, Leo, in her arms, his small hand curled around her finger. Outside her window, the world moved on. Julian Croft's name was now a whispered, cautionary tale on Wall Street, his empire dismantled and sold for parts after the SEC investigation, triggered by Sienna's testimony, had unearthed a decade of fraud. Era looked down at her son's peaceful face and felt the profound, quiet victory of a war she had never wanted but had unequivocally won. She hadn't just survived, she had triumphed, building a new life on the foundations of her own strength. Her architectural firm was thriving, specializing in creating beautiful, sustainable, and safe spaces for families, the very antithesis of the gilded cage she had escaped. Here, in the gentle light of her new home, surrounded by genuine love and the sound of her child's soft breathing, she understood what legacy truly meant. It wasn't a stock price or a corporate merger. It was this. It was peace. It was freedom. That was the story of Era Vance. A tale that started with devastating betrayal in a gilded cage but ended in triumphant freedom. It's a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often unearth our greatest strengths. Era's story shows us that true power isn't about wealth or status, it's about courage, intelligence, and the unbreakable will to fight for your truth and protect what matters most. She didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her life and built a new, beautiful future on her own terms. If you were moved by Era's incredible journey from heartbreak to victory, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it, and share this video with someone who loves a story of ultimate justice. Most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next gripping drama. What did you think of Era's final move? Let us know in the comments below.